This is the assembly guide for the MouseTrap Airsoft trip mine. So starting with the hardware, you'll need 3 M4 by 50mm bolts, and these are the same bolts that we use in our Thunderstrike V2 grenade. You can use any style, but we're using these silver ones with a hex socket. Then you'll need a short type spring from a mousetrap. In order to get these springs, you'll need to buy an actual mousetrap and harvest it from there. The ones we use are these Victor mousetraps that we buy on Amazon, and they're actually very cheap. Just note that you need the type of mousetrap that has the 2 individual smaller springs because the mine is designed for these type. We'll include the link for these mousetraps in the description if you need a reference for the correct type of trap. We also have a reference link in the Colts 3D description. The next piece of hardware for the mine is an M4 by 14mm bolt, and this one is optional as it's only for primers. If you're using 209 primers, then you need this bolt to act as the firing pin, but if you're just using ring caps, then it's not necessary. You'll also need a safety pin. The one we use is just a 1/8 inch by 1 1/4 inch cotter pin and a keychain ring. And the last piece of hardware that you'll need is some sort of line for the tripwire. We recommend using fishing line because it's practically invisible when laid out. The one that we use is just this generic 10-pound fishing line. You could use any strength that you want, but 10-pound has worked the best in our experience. You could probably get away with some 4-pound line, but it might be prone to snapping. 20 feet of it should suffice for most pathways that you'll be setting it up on, but you could go 30 or even 40 feet. I've pre-cut a section of about 20 feet, and that's what I'll be using for the assembly. So getting started with the actual assembly, the first step is to attach the ground spike to the main body. To do this, you'll need one of the M4 by 50mm bolts, and just get the thread started in this hole in the base of the mine. Once you have a little bit of it sticking out, go ahead and thread on the ground spike. It doesn't have to be threaded all the way, just enough so that you can get a hold on it, and then continue screwing in the bolt. And make sure that the spike is really screwed in tight. So the next step is to put in the striker assembly with the spring, but first we'll need to harvest one of the springs from the mousetrap. It's actually really easy to do this, and all you need is a good pair of pliers. So what we need to do first is bend this piece of metal up so that we can free the striker assembly. Just to get a better angle, it's this rounded piece right here. So simply grab it and bend it up. You don't need to bend it up a ton, just until it can release from this bar. And one thing I forgot to mention, you can go ahead and unhook the springs from the striker to make it easier to disassemble, just like so that the striker is not under tension. So I'll continue bending this piece until I can free it from the bar. You can see I've bent it up enough to release the flat piece. Once you have it bent up, you can simply push it out to the side and unhook it. And then from there, you can just pull out the whole bar. And now you have 2 usable springs, and we won't need any of the other parts from the mousetrap. So in the striker, there are actually 2 slots for the spring to go in, as well as inside of the main body. And the reason for that is because these springs are winded in different directions, so you can use either one without wasting the other. You can just go ahead and use one of the springs, as the assembly is the same for both of them. But before we continue with the striker assembly, we'll need to cut off a small section from each end of the spring. So you want the shorter end to go into the striker. As you can see, this one goes into the right hole. This is the orientation that it should be in. The only reason to cut the springs is so that there isn't any sticking out of the striker like this, and to get rid of this hook. So grab a pair of wire cutters and simply cut off this hook on the end. After you've cut off the hook from this end, you want to cut it about another 10mm. So the spring should look something like this. Essentially, you want to cut this end so that it's not sticking out, and you want to cut this end about 10mm down from the hook. And you actually don't even need to cut this end if you're okay with it sticking out. So now we can place the striker into the main body by aligning this end of the spring into the slot at the bottom. So once you've got the spring in the slot, you can push it forward to align the holes on the striker and the main body. Once you've got those holes aligned, hold it down and take one of the M4 by 50mm bolts and screw it all the way through. Another easy way to do it is to place the striker in first and screw it in just a little bit, and then align the spring into the slots. Once you've got the bolt all the way through, you can go ahead and test it to make sure that it actually rotates. And the last part for the actual mechanism is installing the pivoting lever. Start threading the last M4 by 50mm bolt into the top holes. And before the bolt starts sticking out, go ahead and place on the pivoting lever and make sure that it aligns all the way through. Now you can test the mechanism by cocking it and letting it go. And if you're using primers, you can go ahead and screw in that M4 by 14 millimeter bolt into the top of the striker. So now that we have the mine fully assembled, we'll need to tie on the fishing line to the breakaway sear and the stake. Take one end of the line and tie it through this hole on the stake. So the knot that we like to use is the Palomar knot, which is a popular fishing technique, and it provides a really strong grip on the stake. To tie it, simply take one end of the line and thread it through the top hole on the stake, and then thread it back through the same hole. So now you should have this sort of double line, and from here, just do a regular overhand knot. And before tightening it all the way, grab this loop and wrap it around the entire stake. And then just tighten it up. So once you've got the knot tied, you can go ahead and trim off some of the excess, and then start winding the line around the stake. And make sure to leave a little bit of excess because we'll need to do the same knot onto the breakaway sear. So go ahead and tie the same knot onto the breakaway sear. And just to show the knot again, thread it through the hole and then back the other way. And once you have it on this double line, simply do an overhand knot. Then wrap this loop around the sear and tighten it up. Then go ahead and wind it up the rest of the way. So that's the entire trip mine assembled. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments or you can email us, and all of the links will be in the description.